The ceiling fan above my kitchen table made that familiar clicking sound it had been making for 3 years now. The one Daniel kept promising to fix. Outside, the thermometer on my Austin porch read 95 degrees, and the afternoon sun was doing its best to remind me why July in Texas feels like living inside someone's mouth. I was washing the lunch dishes, my hands moving in the same rhythm they'd followed for 40 years of marriage and 5 years of widowhood, when the phone rang. "Mom!" Noah's voice crackled through my old landline, thick with confusion and something else I couldn't quite place. My youngest son, the pilot, always sounded confident when he called from work. Not today. "What is it, honey?" I dried my hands on the dish towel, the one with little blue bonnets that Harper had given me last Mother's Day. "Mom, I'm at Austin Bergstrom. God, this is so weird. I'm holding Harper's passport." His voice dropped to a whisper. "She's on my flight to Paris right now. First class, seat 2A. She's sitting next to some guy in an expensive suit, and they're holding hands, Mom." The dish towel slipped from my fingers. "What do you mean you're holding Harper's passport?" She dropped it at security. I was going to give it back, but then I saw her boarding. "Mom!" Harper's voice floated down from upstairs, bright and cheerful. "I'm just going to hop in the shower real quick." The silence on the phone stretched like pulled taffy. Noah's breathing was the only sound, punctuated by the distant announcements echoing to the airport terminal. "Mom!" Noah's voice was barely audible now. Did Harper just call out to you?" My hand found the edge of the kitchen counter, gripping it until my knuckles went white. "Yes, but Mom!" "She's right here, on my plane." The gate agent called her name twice. Harper Vega Carter. She answered. She's wearing Daniel's old Austin City Limits t-shirt, the faded blue one she always steals from his closet. The world tilted sideways. I looked up at the ceiling, toward the bathroom where water had just started running. The old pipes groaned their familiar greeting. "Noah, honey, are you absolutely certain?" I've been watching her for 10 minutes. She ordered champagne and asked for extra peanuts. You know how she does that thing where she hoards them in her purse for Mason? "But Mom," his voice caught. "Something's wrong. The guy she's with keeps putting his hand on her lower back, and she's not pulling away. And her laugh, it's different, louder." I sank into the kitchen chair, the same one I'd occupied for every family dinner, every homework session, every late-night worry that comes with raising 2 boys. The chair creaked under my weight, a sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. "What should I do, Mom?" Before I could answer, footsteps padded down the stairs, light, quick steps and bare feet. Harper appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark hair damp at the edges, wearing Daniel's old University of Texas sleep shirt that hung loose on her small frame. "Who's on the phone?" she asked, reaching for the glass of sweet tea she'd left on the counter an hour ago. I studied her face, the same heart-shaped face I'd grown to love over the 8 years she'd been part of our family. The same small scar above her left eyebrow from when she'd walked into a glass door at 6 years old. The same way of tilting her head slightly to the left when she was curious about something. "It's Noah," I managed. "Oh." Her face brightened. "Tell him I said bon voyage." I know he was nervous about the Paris route. My throat felt like I'd swallowed sand. "Noah," Harper says. "I heard her, Mom." His voice was hollow now. "I heard her, but she's also right here, 30,000 feet above the ground, laughing at something the stranger is whispering in her ear." Harper moved to the refrigerator, pulling out ingredients for what looked like her famous chili, the one she'd been perfecting since she married Daniel. 2 pounds of ground beef, 1 tablespoon of cumin, just a pinch of brown sugar. I knew the recipe by heart because she'd handwritten it on the index card still taped to the refrigerator door, her neat cursive spelling out each measurement in dark blue ink. But as I watched her work, something nagged at me, the way she held the wooden spoon in her left hand when she'd always been right-handed, the way she hummed under her breath, not "You Are My Sunshine," the song she always hummed while cooking, but something I didn't recognize. "Noah," I said quietly, never taking my eyes off Harper's back as she bent over the stove. "I need you to call me when you land. Don't say anything to anyone yet. Mom, what's happening? I watched Harper taste the chili and add more sugar, much more than her usual pinch. She'd always been careful about that, knowing Daniel was watching his weight, and Mason didn't like things too sweet. I don't know yet, honey, but something's not right. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, watching this woman who looked exactly like my daughter-in-law, who knew where we kept paprika and how Mason liked his grilled cheese cut diagonally, but who hummed unfamiliar songs and cooked with her left hand and made our family's chili sweeter than it had any right to be. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor my husband had installed 23 years ago. Everything looked the same yellow walls, the same ceramic rooster Daniel had given me as a joke that somehow became permanent, the same magnetic alphabet letters Mason had arranged to spell grandma on the refrigerator door. But nothing felt the same. Harper glanced over her shoulder, catching me staring. Everything okay, Mom? You look pale. Just tired. Sweetheart, it's the heat. She nodded, turning back to the stove. Why don't you sit down? I'll bring you some sweet tea with extra ice. I watched her move through my kitchen with practiced ease, opening the cabinet where we kept the good glasses, knowing exactly how much ice I liked, remembering to grab the lemon from the crisper drawer. Every movement was right. Was Harper, was home, except for the tiny things that weren't. As she handed me the glass, our fingers brushed, and I noticed something I'd never seen before, small calluses on her palms, the kind that come from hard physical work. Harper was a substitute teacher and part-time yoga instructor. Her hands had always been soft. Thank you, honey. I sipped the tea, tasting the perfect balance of sugar and lemon that only Harper ever got quite right. This is perfect. She beamed at me, the same smile that had welcomed me into her heart 8 years ago when Daniel brought her home for Christmas. The same smile that had comforted me through my husband's funeral, that had lit up when she told me she was pregnant with Mason, that had looked so lost the day her own mother passed away 3 years ago. It was Harper's smile. But as I sat there in the gathering shadows of my kitchen, listening to the ceiling fan click and the chili bubble on the stove, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, Harper was smiling that same exact smile at a stranger in first class. The phone rang again. I'll get it, Harper said quickly, moving toward the wall phone faster than I'd ever seen her move. Hello? Oh, hi, Denise. She glanced at me nervously. No, Mom's right here. She's just resting. It's awfully hot today, isn't it? A pause. What? Oh, about earlier? I was just having an off day. You know how it is. I held out my hand for the phone, but Harper shook her head slightly, a gesture so subtle I almost missed it. I'll tell you called. Okay. Bye now. She hung up, not meeting my eyes. Denise says hi. She wanted to thank you for the conversation you two had at Russo's Bakery this morning, but I told her you were here all morning with me. My blood went cold. I'd been at Russo's Bakery at 10:30, just like I was every Tuesday. Denise Harper, no relation, just an unfortunate coincidence of last names, had been there too, and we'd talked about her granddaughter's piano recital while sharing a slice of Mr. Russo's famous tiramisu. But if I was at Russo's at 10:30, and Harper was supposedly here with me, Harper, I said carefully, what did you do this morning while I was out? For just a moment, her composure cracked. Her eyes darted toward the back door, then to the window, then back to me. I was here, she said too quickly. I cleaned Mason's room and started a load of laundry. You know, the usual Tuesday stuff. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. Tuesday mornings. Harper always took Mason to his swimming lessons at the community center. It was their special time together. Just the two of them. She'd never miss it, and she'd certainly never forget to mention it. The chili started to bubble over, and Harper rushed to turn down the heat. As she stirred, I noticed something else that made my chest tighten. She stirred clockwise. Harper had always stirred counterclockwise. A quirky habit I'd tease her about because it was the opposite of how everyone else did it. Small things. Tiny things that individually meant nothing. But together, I thought about Noah's voice, confused and worried from 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. I thought about the calluses on soft hands, about left-handed stirring in sweet chili, and unfamiliar songs hummed in my kitchen. And I thought about the woman sleeping next to a stranger in first class, wearing my son's favorite t-shirt, and hoarding peanuts for a grandson she wouldn't be home to see. The ceiling fan clicked overhead, marking time like a broken metronome. Something was very, very wrong in my house. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind turning over every detail like worry beads. The house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs. The floorboard by the bathroom that groaned when anyone over 100 pounds stepped on it. The whistle the wind made to the gap in my bedroom window that I'd been meaning to fix for months. At 2:30 in the morning, I got up and padded to the kitchen in my slippers. The moonlight through the window cast everything in silver and shadow, making my familiar space look foreign, unsettled. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the junk drawer, the same kind I'd used to keep grocery lists and homework schedules when the boys were little, and sat down at the table with a pen. At the top of the page, I wrote, Tuesday, July 18th, the day everything changed. Then I began listing everything that had felt wrong. Stirring with left hand. Harper's right-handed humming unfamiliar song. Usually you are my sunshine. Chili too sweet. Never uses more than pinch of brown sugar calluses on palms. Harper's hands always soft that she was home while I was at Russo's. But Harper takes Mason's swimming Tuesdays stir clockwise instead of counterclockwise. Didn't mention Mason's swimming lesson moved too fast to answer phone when Denise called. I sat back, looking at my list in the dim light. Individually, each item seemed insignificant. The kind of small variations that happen when someone's tired or distracted or having an off day, as she put it. But together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. The sound of bare feet on hardwood made me look up. Harper stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hall light, wearing one of Daniel's old t-shirts that came down to her knees. Mom, are you okay? I heard you get up. I flipped the legal pad over casually. Couldn't sleep. You know how it is when it's this hot. She padded into the kitchen, her feet making small slapping sounds against the linoleum. Want me to make you some warm milk? Mom always said it helped with insomnia. Something twisted in my chest. Harper's mother had died 3 years ago, and in all the nights I'd comforted Harper through her grief, she'd never once mentioned warm milk as her mother's remedy. Her mother had been a bourbon and honey woman, a remedy Harper had inherited and used herself during her worst days of mourning. That's sweet of you, honey, but I'm fine. Just gonna sit here a minute and then go back to bed. She hovered by the refrigerator, and in the dim light, I could see her chewing her bottom lip, a nervous habit that was pure Harper, something I'd witnessed through 8 years of family dinners and Christmas mornings and the night Mason had his first fever. Mom. Her voice was smaller now, uncertain. Are you mad at me about something? The question hit me like a physical blow. This was Harper's voice, Harper's insecurity, Harper's way of tilting her head slightly when she was worried about something. Whatever was happening, whoever this woman was, she cared about my opinion. She was afraid of disappointing me. No, sweetheart, I'm not mad. I reached out and squeezed her hand. Soft now, no trace of the calluses I'd felt earlier. Just tired. She squeezed back, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. Okay, but you tell me if something was wrong, right? Of course. After she went back upstairs, I sat in my kitchen for another hour, adding more items to my list. Asked about warm milk. Harper's mom used bourbon and honey hand was soft when she squeezed mine. Callus has gone still nervous mannerisms. Biting lip. Head tilt seems genuinely concerned about my feelings. By morning, I had filled 3 pages. Daniel arrived at 7:30. Same as always. Let himself into the back door with his key. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was rumpled like he'd been running his hands through it. Morning, Mom. He kissed my cheek, smelling like coffee and the sawdust that always seemed to cling to his work clothes. Where's Harper? Still sleeping. She was up late last night. I watched his face carefully. How was your evening? He poured himself coffee from the pot Harper had made. Perfectly. Exactly the way our family liked it. Not too strong, not too weak. Strange, actually. Harper seemed, I don't know, different when I got home from work. More affectionate than usual. She kept asking if I was happy, if I needed anything. It was sweet, but... He shrugged. She seemed nervous about something. I felt my notebook burning a hole in the drawer where I'd hidden it. Nervous how? Just jumpy. And she made my favorite pasta dish, the one with the prosciutto and peas, but she's never made it before. Said she found the recipe online and wanted to surprise me. He frowned into his coffee mug. The weird thing is, it was perfect, like she'd been making it for years. Before I could respond, Harper appeared in the doorway, looking freshly showered and beautiful in a yellow sundress I'd never seen before. She went straight to Daniel, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and pressing her face against his back in a gesture of such natural intimacy that my heart ached. "Good morning, handsome," she murmured against his shirt. He turned in her arms, smiling for the first time since he'd arrived. "Good morning yourself. You look beautiful." "I feel beautiful." She stretched up on her toes to kiss him, and he met her halfway, their lips touching with the easy familiarity of 8 years of marriage. I turned away, busy myself with wiping down counters that were already clean. This woman, whoever she was, loved my son. It was written in every gesture, every glance, every soft word. The way she fit against him, the way she smiled when he touched her face. This wasn't performance. This was real. But so was the woman on Noah's flight, sitting next to a stranger and holding his hand. "Mom, you're scrubbing that counter awfully hard." Harper's voice held a note of gentle teasing. "I think it's clean enough." I looked down at my hands, realizing I'd been scrubbing the same spot for who knows how long. "Sorry. Habit." Daniel checked his watch. "I should get going. The Henderson project won't frame itself." He kissed Harper again, then me. "Love you both." After he left, Harper and I stood in the kitchen, the morning light streaming through the windows and painting everything golden. She looked so normal, so perfectly herself, that for a moment I wondered if I was losing my mind. "I thought I'd take Mason to the park today when he gets home from day camp," she said, pulling eggs from the refrigerator. "Want to come with us? We could have a picnic." Mason, my 7-year-old grandson, who would be home at 3 o'clock, full of stories about capture the flag in arts and crafts and whatever drama had unfolded on the playground, who would run straight to Harper for hugs and snacks and help with the swimming goggles that never seemed to fit quite right. What would happen when he looked at this woman with his clear, honest eyes? Children see things adults miss. They notice when something is wrong, even when they can't put it into words. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart." She cracked eggs into a bowl, and I watched her hands move with Harper's familiar efficiency. Right-handed now, back to normal. The calluses were gone, but there was something else. A small bandage on her index finger that hadn't been there yesterday. "Cut yourself?" I asked. She glanced down at her finger, and for just a second, I saw panic flash across her face. "Oh, that?" "Yes, Anakin lid this morning." Silly me. But I'd been in the kitchen all morning. I'd watch her make coffee and toast, and she hadn't opened any cans. The garbage disposal hadn't run, which it always did when Harper prepared fresh fruit for Daniel's breakfast. There was no evidence anywhere of the kind of accident that would require a bandage. I added it to my mental list, feeling like a detective in my own home. The morning passed quietly. Harper did laundry, chatted with me about Mason's upcoming school year, and made tuna salad for lunch. Perfectly, exactly the way I'd taught her years ago. She seemed more relaxed than she had the night before, more like herself. But when 3 o'clock approached, I noticed her watching the clock. And when Mason's day camp bus pulled up outside, she took a deep breath like someone preparing for a performance. Mason burst through the door like a small tornado, all scraped knees and grass stains, and barely contained energy. "Grandma, Mom, guess what happened today?" He launched into a complicated story about a capture-the-flag victory, while Harper listened with the perfect amount of attention, making all the right noises of surprise and pride. She helped him wash his hands, got him his after-school snack of apple slices and peanut butter, and asked about his day with all the questions a loving mother should ask. But she didn't sing. Every day for 7 years, Harper had greeted Mason's return from school or camp with the same ritual. A few bars of "You Are My Sunshine" hummed while she prepared his snack. It was their thing, their special moment that marked the transition from the adult day to the family evening. Today, she hummed nothing at all. Mason didn't seem to notice consciously, but I saw him glance at her once or twice with a puzzled expression, as if something felt slightly off, but he couldn't pinpoint what. "Mom," he said around a mouthful of apple, "can you help me with my swimming goggles? The strap is weird again." "Of course, baby." She reached for the goggles he dropped by the door, and I watched her face as she examined them. For just a moment, she looked confused, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she'd never seen before. Harper had been dealing with those temperamental goggles for 2 years. She could adjust them in her sleep. She said finally, "Maybe Grandma should help with these. You know how good she is with fixing things." Mason looked at her strangely. "But you always fix them." "I know, but..." She glanced at me helplessly. "I think I might make them worse today. My hands are a little shaky from too much coffee." It was a reasonable excuse, but Mason's puzzled look lingered as I took the goggles and made the simple adjustment Harper had made dozens of times before. That evening, after Daniel came home and we'd shared dinner, the too sweet chili that Harper had made with her left hand, I excused myself early and went to my room. I pulled out my notebook and wrote until my hand cramped, documenting every small wrongness, every tiny fracture and facade of normalcy. But I also wrote about the way she looked at Daniel over dinner, the genuine laughter when Mason told his joke about the pirate and the parrot, the careful way she'd bandage a cut that might not exist. Whoever this woman was, she was trying. She was trying so hard to be Harper, to be the wife and mother and daughter-in-law this family needed. The question that kept me awake until dawn was simple. Why? Wednesday morning arrived with a kind of oppressive heat that makes even the birds give up singing. By 9 a.m., the temperature gauge on my porch already read 88 degrees, and the day stretched ahead like a furnace door open wide. Harper, or whoever she was, had left early, claiming she needed to run errands and would be back by lunch. "I'll just grab some groceries and maybe stop by the library," she'd said, kissing Daniel goodbye with the same tenderness I'd witnessed the day before. "Mom, need anything while I'm out?" I'd shaken my head, watching to the kitchen window as she walked her car, a white Honda Civic that had been Harper's pride and joy since she'd finally paid it off 2 years ago. She'd driven away at exactly 9:15, and I'd noted the time in my notebook like the amateur detective I was becoming. By 9:30, I was in my own car, following a route I'd traced on my phone's GPS. If Harper was running normal errands, she'd head toward the H-E-B grocery store or the library on Barton Springs Road. Both were in the opposite direction from where I was driving. I was headed toward the Labor District, 3 miles east of our quiet neighborhood, where Austin kept its less picturesque secrets. The drive took me through parts of the city I rarely saw, past auto repair shops with cars balanced on cinder blocks, past convenience stores with hand-painted signs in Spanish, past small houses with front yards more dirt than grass, where children played with water hoses to beat the heat. It was a different Austin from the one I knew, where property values rose with each new coffee shop, and young professionals complained about traffic while sipping $15 cocktails. I almost missed her. The white Civic was parked at the end of a narrow street lined with small rental houses, the kind built quickly after the war and never quite maintained properly. Harper, and I was still thinking of her as Harper, because what else did I call her? Was walking quickly down the sidewalk, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses despite the relatively early hour. I parked a block away and followed on foot, grateful for the walking shoes I'd worn, and a large sun hat that helped disguise my profile. The heat was already brutal, radiating up from the concrete sidewalk and pressing down from the cloudless sky like a weight. Sweat trickled down my back as I tried to maintain distance while keeping her in sight. She stopped at a house halfway down the block, a tiny place with peeling yellow paint, and a front porch barely large enough for the 2 plastic chairs someone had positioned there. The small yard was mostly bare earth, but someone had tried to grow tomatoes in large buckets along the side of the house. A few hardy plants had actually succeeded, their red fruit bright against the brown stems. Harper looked around nervously before knocking on the front door. After a moment, it opened, and she disappeared inside. I found a spot in the shade of a scraggly oak tree across the street, pretending to check my phone while keeping an eye on the yellow house. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of air conditioning units working overtime and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. 20 minutes later, the front door opened again, but this time, two people emerged. My heart stopped. The first was Harper, the woman I'd watched eat breakfast, kiss my son goodbye, and drive away in a white Honda Civic. The second was also Harper, exactly Harper. Same height, same build, same dark hair, same way of moving to the world with quick, efficient steps. They stood on the tiny porch talking in voices too low for me to hear. Even at this distance, the resemblance was so perfect it made my eyes water trying to focus on them. They could have been reflections of each other, or the same person caught in a trick of light. One of them, I couldn't tell which, handed the other a small paper bag. They embraced briefly, the kind of hug you give someone you're worried about. And then the first Harper walked back toward the car while the second disappeared back into the house. I crouched behind a parked truck, feeling ridiculous and terrified in equal measure as the white Civic drove past my hiding spot. Through the windshield, I caught a glimpse of the driver's profile. Harper's profile, the same nose and chin and way of holding her head that I'd been looking at across my dinner table for 8 years. After the car disappeared, I sat in the shade for another 10 minutes, trying to process what I just witnessed. Twins. It had to be twins. But Harper had never mentioned having a sister, let alone an identical twin. In 8 years of marriage to my son, through family dinners and holidays and late-night conversations about everything from politics to recipe disasters, she never once mentioned growing up with a sibling. The heat was becoming unbearable, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed to know who lived in that yellow house, who the other Harper was, and why they were meeting like conspirators in a neighborhood my daughter-in-law had never had any reason to visit. I waited another 15 minutes, then walked across the street and knocked on the door. The woman who answered looked so much like Harper that my breath caught in my throat. Same face, same eyes, same small scar above the left eyebrow. But there were differences that became apparent the longer I looked. Her hands were rougher, with those calluses I'd noticed yesterday. Her clothes were cheaper. Her posture held a wariness that Harper had never needed to develop. And her eyes, while the same shape and color, held a different kind of knowledge. "Yes?" she said, and even her voice was Harper's voice, but with a slight accent that Harper had never had. "I'm sorry to bother you." I began, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm Eloise Carter. I think you might know my daughter-in-law, Harper." The woman's face went white. She gripped the doorframe so hard her knuckles stood out like small mountains under her skin. I don't know what you're talking about." But her eyes told a different story. Her eyes were full of guilt and fear and something that looked almost like relief. "Please," I said gently, "I just want to understand what's happening. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I'm worried about my family." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, she stepped back and opened the door wider. "You'd better come in." "But I can't talk for long. She'll be back, and if she finds out I talked to you." The inside of the house was small but clean, with furniture that had seen better decades and photographs on every available surface. As my eyes adjusted to the dimmer light, I realized all the photographs showed the same two people, an elderly Hispanic couple, the woman tiny and fierce-looking, the man tall and gentle-faced. In some of the pictures, they were young. In others, middle-aged. In the most recent ones, they both looked frail, the kind of frailty that comes with serious illness and not enough money for proper care. "Those are my parents," the woman said, following my gaze. "Rosa and Miguel Navarro. They raised me from when I was 3 days old." "Raised you?" I settled onto the small couch she indicated, noting the way she perched on the edge of the chair across from me, ready to bolt if necessary. "I was given up, left at the hospital. The nurses said there had been twins, but only one baby went home with the family. She looked down at her hands, those calloused, working hands. Rosa was a cleaning lady at the hospital. She'd been trying to have kids for 10 years. When she saw me there, still in the nursery after a week with no one to claim me, my throat felt tight. "What's your name?" "Lila Navarro." She looked up at me, and I saw Harper's eyes fill with a pain Harper had never known. And before you ask, yes, I know who she is. I know she grew up with parents who could afford piano lessons and summer camps and college. I know she married your son and has a little boy who calls her mom. How long have you known about her? 2 years. I was working at the hospital. I'm a nurse's aide, and I was going through old records for a patient's family. There was a mix-up with some files, and I saw my own birth record. And hers. Same day, same time, same hospital. Just 2 different outcomes. I thought about Harper's mother, who had died 3 years ago. A woman who had loved her daughter fiercely, who had given her every advantage, every opportunity, who had never known that somewhere across town, another daughter was learning to change bedpans and work double shifts to help pay for the medical bills of the people who'd saved her from being forgotten entirely. "Lila," I said carefully, "what is Harper asking you to do?" Her composure cracked. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. Harper's cheeks. But tears Harper had never had to cry. At first, it was just small things. Go to a grocery store wearing her clothes, in case anyone saw her car there when she was supposed to be somewhere else. Pick up Mason from school once or twice when she had appointments. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She said she'd pay for Papa's medications if I helped her. He needs insulin and Mama's got heart problems, and we don't have insurance good enough to cover everything. "What kind of appointments?" Lila looked away. "I don't ask, but there's a man who picks her up sometimes. Expensive car, expensive clothes. He's not your son." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Harper was having an affair, and she was using her identical twin, a twin she'd somehow discovered and recruited, to provide her with alibis, while Lila went to parent-teacher conferences and grocery shopping, and all the mundane tasks of Harper's life. Harper was free to conduct her secret relationship with someone else. "Yesterday," I said, "you were at my house all day." "Where was she?" "Paris." Lila's voice was barely a whisper. She flew to Paris with him. But she's coming back tonight, and tomorrow morning I go back to being invisible, and she goes back to being your daughter-in-law. "And Mason?" "What about Mason?" Fresh tears started flowing. She told me he wouldn't notice. That little kids don't pay attention to details. But he does notice. Yesterday, he kept looking at me funny, like he knew something was wrong but couldn't figure out what. And when he asked me to help with his goggles, she shook her head. I've never seen those goggles before in my life. I didn't know how to help him. I reached across the small space between us and took her rough, calloused hands in mine. "Lila, this has to stop." "I know." Her voice broke completely. "I know it's wrong. But if I don't help her, Papa will die. The insulin costs $800 a month, and Mama's heart medicine is another $400. I work 2 jobs already, and it's not enough. When Harper found me, when she offered to help, I thought maybe God was finally answering our prayers." "How did she find you?" "She was at the hospital when Papa had his last episode. She saw me in the hallway and just stopped, stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. Later, she came back and started asking questions. It didn't take long to figure out we were sisters." Lila looked up at me with eyes full of shame. She said she'd wondered about twins her whole life. Her parents had always been vague about her birth, said it was complicated. When she saw me, she knew. I sat in that small, clean house, holding the hands of a woman who looked exactly like my daughter-in-law but had lived an entirely different life, and felt the weight of an impossible situation settling around us like the oppressive heat outside. Harper was using Lila's desperation to fund her affair, and Lila was caught between letting her adoptive parents die and betraying a family she'd never really been part of. "There has to be another way," I said finally. "What way?" "Harper's got money, connections, a life that lets her help people like us. I've got two part-time jobs and parents who need medicine I can't afford. Lila pulled her hands free and stood up, pacing to the small window that looked out on the struggling tomato plants. You don't understand what it's like to watch people you love suffer because you can't help them. But I did understand. I'd watched my husband deteriorate for 6 months before the cancer finally took him, had seen the fear in his eyes when the bills started piling up faster than our insurance could cover them. I'd sold my engagement ring to pay for his last round of treatments, not because they would save him, but because I couldn't bear to give up hope. Lila listened to me. I stood up and moved to stand beside her at the window. Harper is lying to her husband, lying to her son, and she's lying to you too. Do you really think someone who would deceive her own family like this is going to keep her promises to you? She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the heat shimmer rising from the cracked sidewalk. What choice do I have? There are always choices. They're not always good choices, but they exist. I turned to face her profile. Harper's profile, but worn by worry and work in ways Harper's never had been. Help me stop this. Help me tell the truth. And then what? You think your son is going to welcome me into his family with open arms? You think that little boy is going to understand why his mother has been lying to him? She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. I'll lose the only help I've ever had, and for what? To salve your conscience. To save Mason from growing up thinking love is something you perform instead of something you feel. To save Daniel from wasting his life on someone who sees him as a convenient cover story. I touched her arm gently. And to save you from becoming someone you're not. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something shift in her expression. You'd really help? With Papa and Mama, I mean? Even after. But no more lies, Lila. No more pretending to be someone else. If we're going to help your parents, we're going to do it honestly. Before she could answer, we heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. Lila went rigid, her face draining of color. She's back early. You have to go. If she finds you here... I moved toward the back of the house. Is there another way out? Through the kitchen. The back door leads to the alley. She grabbed my arm. Mrs. Carter, please. Don't tell her you were here. Not yet. Let me figure out what to do. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to march out that front door and confront Harper, the real Harper, right there in the street. To demand answers and put an end to this elaborate deception once and for all. But looking at Lila's terrified face, I realized that ending this wrong required more than just exposing the truth. It required finding a way forward that didn't destroy the innocent people caught in Harper's web of lies. 3 days, I said quietly. I'll give you 3 days to figure out how to tell Harper this ends. After that, I'm telling Daniel myself. She nodded quickly, already moving toward the front door to intercept her sister. 3 days. I understand. I slipped out through the back door into an alley that smelled of overheated garbage and car exhaust, my heart pounding, as I made my way back to my car. Through the thin walls of the little yellow house, I could hear voices. Harper's voice and Lila's voice, identical but speaking about things I couldn't quite make out. The drive home took me back through the nicer parts of Austin, where the houses had professionally maintained lawns and the children who played in the sprinklers wore name-brand bathing suits. It was only 3 miles, but it felt like traveling between 2 different worlds. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the real Harper's white Civic was already there, parked in its usual spot next to the garage. Through the kitchen window, I could see her moving around, unpacking groceries from what looked like several shopping bags. I sat in my car for a moment, air conditioning running, trying to prepare myself for a performance I was about to witness. Harper would tell me about her morning errands, would probably have stories about the grocery store or the library, would ask about my day with the same warm interest she'd shown for 8 years. And I would have to smile and nod and pretend I didn't know that she'd just spent the morning debriefing with her identical twin about the logistics of their shared deception. When I finally walked into the kitchen, Harper looked up from the groceries with a bright smile. Mom, how was your morning? I hope you weren't too bored without me around to keep you company. She looked refreshed, relaxed in a way she hadn't the past 2 days. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup fresh, her clothes unmarked by the devastating heat outside. Nothing about her suggested she'd spent time in a small, poorly air-conditioned house, having an emotional conversation with her secret sister. It was fine, sweetheart. Just puttered around the house. I moved to help her put groceries away, noting that she bought all of Mason's favorite snacks, Daniel's preferred brand of coffee, and the specific type of yogurt I like for breakfast. Looks like you had a successful shopping trip. I did, and I found the most wonderful farmer's market. The tomatoes were so beautiful I couldn't resist buying extra. She held up a bag of perfectly ripe tomatoes, the kind that cost $4 a pound at the fancy grocery stores. I thought about the struggling tomato plants in buckets outside Lila's house, about the way Lila had looked at those photographs of her aging parents, about the desperate mathematics of insulin and heart medication. They're lovely, I said. Harper began washing the tomatoes in the sink, humming softly to herself. After a moment, I recognized the song. You Are My Sunshine, the same tune she'd failed to hum yesterday, the same song she'd always sung with Mason. She was back to being Harper, complete and perfect and entirely convincing. But I knew now that this Harper, the one who hummed the right songs and stirred counterclockwise and knew exactly how to fix swimming goggles, was a woman who was living a double life, the woman who had convinced her desperate, identical twin to help her maintain an elaborate lie that was tearing at the fabric of our family. Harper, I said carefully, do you ever think about family? About the people we're born to versus the people who raise us? Her hand stilled on the tomatoes for just a moment. That's an interesting question. Why do you ask? I was just thinking about how blessed we are. You and Daniel, Mason, all of us together. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if things had been different, if you'd grown up somewhere else with different people. She resumed washing, but I could see tension in her shoulders. I think we make our own families, don't you? Blood doesn't always matter as much as love and commitment. But don't you think we have obligations to our blood family too, even if we didn't grow up with them? This time, she turned to look at me directly, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face, guilt, fear, or maybe just annoyance at my philosophical questions. Mom, is everything okay? You seem, I don't know, worried about something. I looked at this woman who had been my daughter-in-law for 8 years, who had held my hand to my husband's funeral, who had given me a grandson I adored more than my own life, who was, in this moment, lied to me about everything from where she'd spent the morning to who she really was inside her own heart. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just the heat making me philosophical, I guess. She smiled and returned to her tomatoes, humming, You Are My Sunshine, in a voice that was absolutely, perfectly Harper's. But now I knew that perfection was a performance, and the real Harper, the one who could lie to her husband's face and use her sister's desperation to cover her tracks, was someone I wasn't sure I'd ever really known at all. Thursday morning brought no relief from the heat. I woke before dawn, my sheets damp with sweat and my mind already racing through the impossible mathematics of the situation. In my notebook, now hidden in my underwear drawer like some sort of suburban spy, I've been tracking every inconsistency, every moment when Harper seemed to flicker between two different versions of herself. But this morning, she was flawless. She made Daniel's coffee exactly right, kissed him goodbye with the perfect balance of affection and casual familiarity, and sent Mason off to day camp with his lunch packed the way he liked it. Sandwich cut diagonally, apple slices in a separate bag, so they wouldn't make the crackers soggy, and note tucked inside that said, Have the best day, Sunshine Boy. It was the note that got to me. Harper had been writing those notes for 3 years, ever since Mason started day camp. Different words, same message. You are loved. Someone is thinking about you. You matter. I thought I'd visit Denise today, I said casually as Harper wiped down the counter. She mentioned wanting to show me her new rose garden. Harper's hand stilled for just a moment. That sounds nice. Tell her I said hello. Will do. What about you? Any plans for today? Just the usual. Might do some reading. Maybe organize the closets. Nothing exciting. She smiled at me, and it was Harper's smile, warm and genuine and completely convincing. But I knew now that Harper's usual Thursday involved switching places with her twin sister, and I wondered which Harper would be organizing closets while the other did God knows what with her mysterious boyfriend. I left the house at 10, driving toward Denise's neighborhood, but taking a detour through the labor district first. The white Civic was already parked at the yellow house, and I could see two figures through the front window, sitting close together on that small couch. The coordination required was staggering. They had to share information constantly. What Daniel had worn to work, what mood Mason had been in, what I'd said about my plans for the day. Every conversation Harper had with her family had to be relayed to Lila, so she could maintain the illusion seamlessly. And it was seamless. That was the most disturbing part. If Noah hadn't made that phone call from the airport, if I hadn't started paying attention to the tiny inconsistencies, I might never have known. I drove to Denise's house with my mind churning. Denise Harper, still the strangest coincidence in this whole mess, lived in a craftsman bungalow that was the envy of the neighborhood. She'd spent 20 years turning her backyard into something that belonged in a magazine, with climbing roses and herb gardens and a small fountain that attracted birds from all over Austin. "You look terrible," she said bluntly when I arrived, which was why I'd been friends with Denise for 15 years. She never lied to spare feelings. "I feel terrible. Can we sit somewhere private?" She led me to her back porch, where ceiling fans moved the hot air around without making it particularly cooler. The roses were beautiful. Deep red climbers that smelled like my grandmother's garden, but I couldn't focus on their beauty today. "Denise, I need to ask you about Tuesday morning. At Russo's." She settled into her wicker chair with the careful movements of someone whose knees weren't what they used to be. "What about it?" "You called the house later and thanked Harper for our conversation. But Harper was home with me all morning." Denise's eyes sharpened. At 66, she was still sharp as a tack, with the kind of observational skills that came from 30 years of teaching middle school. "No, she wasn't. Harper was at Russo's with you, sitting at that little table by the window. We talked about my granddaughter's piano recital, and she told me that story about Mason's swimming lessons." "What story?" "About how he'd finally gotten brave enough to jump off the diving board, but only if she was in the pool to catch him. She seemed different, though, quieter than usual, and she kept checking her phone like she was expecting a call." My heart sank. Lila had been there, playing Harper, probably nervous about maintaining the deception. She'd known enough details about Mason swimming to fake a conversation, but she'd been waiting for instructions, for guidance on how to navigate social situations Harper would have handled effortlessly. "Denise, what did Harper order?" "That's the odd thing. She got a plain coffee and just sat there stirring it. You know how Harper always gets that fancy latte with extra foam? And she loves Mr. Russo's tiramisu. But she didn't order anything to eat. Said she wasn't hungry. Because Lila probably didn't know Harper's usual order. Because she was doing her best to impersonate someone she'd never really been able to study closely. And afterward, when I mentioned how nice it was to chat, she looked confused for a second, like she didn't remember what we'd talked about. I sat in Denise's garden, surrounded by the smell of roses and the sound of her fountain, and felt the full weight of what Harper had done. She hadn't just deceived her own family. She'd involved innocent neighbors, casual friends, anyone who might serve as an alibi for her elaborate double life. "Eloise, what's going on?" "You're scaring me." I looked at my oldest friend, this woman who'd helped me through my husband's death and celebrated with me when Mason took his first steps, and realized I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Not until I figured out how to handle this without destroying Daniel and Mason in the process. I'm worried Harper might be having some kind of memory issues. Small things, inconsistencies. I'm probably just being paranoid. Denise reached over and squeezed my hand. "Honey, if you're worried, you should talk to her doctor. Memory problems in someone her age. There could be medical explanations." I nodded, knowing there was a medical explanation, just not the kind Denise was thinking of. The medical explanation was that Harper had been born with an identical twin, and that twin was now living Harper's life part-time while Harper conducted an affair with someone wealthy enough to fly her to Paris on a whim. I stayed at Denise's for another hour, admiring her roses, and trying to act normal while my mind raced through possibilities. When I finally drove home, the white Civic was in the driveway again, and Harper was in the kitchen preparing what looked like an elaborate dinner. Mom, perfect timing. I'm making Daniel's favorite pot roast. Thought we could have a nice family dinner tonight. She was wearing a sundress I recognized, her hair pulled back in a messy bun she preferred when cooking, her face slightly flushed from the heat of the oven. She looked happy domestic, like a woman who'd spent the day contentedly organizing closets and planning a special meal for her family. That's lovely, sweetheart. Need any help? Could you set the table? I want everything to be perfect. I got out the good china, the set Daniel's father had given us when Daniel and Harper got married, and arranged it carefully on the dining room table. Through the window, I could see Mason's day camp bus approaching, and I felt a familiar surge of anticipation. In 5 minutes, my grandson would burst through the door with stories and energy and complete trust that his world was exactly what it appeared to be. But his world was built on lies, and I was the only one who knew it. Harper greeted Mason with their usual routine, a few bars of "You are my sunshine," while she prepared his snack. She asked about his day with genuine interest, helped him with his goggles without any confusion, and listened to his rambling story about a frog they'd found by the camp's pond with the patience of a mother who genuinely adored her child. When Daniel got home, she kissed him like a woman who'd been looking forward to his return all day. Over dinner, she asked thoughtful questions about his work, laughed at his stories about difficult clients, and shared amusing anecdotes about her own quiet day at home. She was perfect, absolutely, completely perfect. And that perfection was what finally convinced me that this was the real Harper, not Lila. The woman at the Yellow House couldn't have maintained this level of nuanced performance, couldn't have navigated the thousands of tiny interactions that make up a family dinner. This was Harper herself, fresh from whatever she'd been doing while her sister covered for her, slipping back into her role as wife and mother with practiced ease. Harper, Daniel said as she served dessert, homemade peach cobbler that smelled like summer. You seem really happy today. More relaxed than you've been in a while. She paused in her serving, and I saw something flicker across her face too quickly to interpret. Do I? I guess I just had a good day. Sometimes you need a little time to yourself to appreciate what you have. Well, whatever you did, keep doing it. I like seeing you smile like that. She smiled at him then, bright and genuine, and leaned over to kiss his forehead. I love you, Daniel Carter. Don't ever forget that. The tenderness in her voice was real. Whatever else Harper was doing, however elaborate her deception, her love for Daniel was genuine. That made it worse somehow, the idea that she could love him and still lie to him so completely. After dinner, Mason helped Harper with the dishes while Daniel watched baseball on television. I sat at the kitchen table, ostensibly reading a magazine, but actually watching this domestic scene play out with new eyes. Harper hummed while she washed dishes, pausing occasionally to tickle Mason or steal a hug when he wasn't expecting it. When he spilled soap bubbles on the floor, she laughed instead of scolding him. And when he asked if they could have ice cream for breakfast tomorrow, she pretended to consider it seriously before explaining why vegetables were important for growing boys. She was a good mother. Despite everything else, despite the lies and deception and the identical twin hidden across town, Harper was genuinely good with Mason. She was patient and loving and attentive in ways that couldn't be faked day after day, which made my next decision that much harder. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at my kitchen table with my notebook and tried to figure out how to save my family without destroying it. I had 2 days left of the deadline I had given Lila. 2 days before I planned to tell Daniel the truth about what his wife was really doing. But looking around my kitchen, at the refrigerator covered with Mason's artwork, at the family photos on the windowsill, at the small signs of love and belonging that accumulate over years of shared life, I realized that telling the truth was going to shatter everything. Daniel would never trust anyone again. Mason would grow up knowing his mother had lied to him every day for months. And Lila would lose the only help she'd ever had for her aging parents, probably ending up in legal trouble for identity fraud. There had to be another way. There had to be a path through this that didn't leave everyone I loved broken and bitter. I just had to figure out what it was before Harper's house of cards collapsed on all of us. Outside, The Texas night pressed against my windows like a living thing, hot and heavy and full of secrets. Somewhere across town, Lila was probably lying awake in her small bed, worrying about insulin costs and heart medications, an impossible choice between betraying her sister and letting her parents suffer. And upstairs, Harper was sleeping peacefully next to my son, dreaming whatever dreams come to women who've learned to live double lives with perfect precision. I wrote in my notebook until my hand cramped, documenting every detail, every conversation, every small moment that would matter when the truth finally came out. Because I was beginning to understand that the truth was inevitable now. The only question was whether it would destroy us or somehow, impossibly, set us free. Friday morning arrived with the promise of breaking heat records. The Weather Service had issued warnings about staying indoors, about checking on elderly neighbors, about the dangers of prolonged exposure to temperatures that would climb past 100 degrees before noon. But the heat outside was nothing compared to the pressure building inside our house, where secrets pressed against the walls like steam in a kettle. Harper seemed nervous at breakfast. Small things, barely noticeable unless you've been watching for them. She dropped her coffee mug, catching it just before it hit the floor. She forgot to pack Mason's swim goggles for day camp until he reminded her. And when Daniel kissed her goodbye, she held on to him a moment longer than usual, her fingers gripping his work shirt like she was afraid to let him go. "Everything okay?" he asked, smoothing her hair back from her face with a gentle gesture of someone who'd been doing it for 8 years. "Of course. Just tired. This heat makes it hard to sleep." After they left, Harper stood at the kitchen window, watching Daniel's truck disappear down our street. The morning light caught the worry lines around her eyes, lines that seemed deeper than they had been a week ago. "I thought I might visit the farmer's market this morning," she said without turning around. "Pick up some fresh corn for dinner. In this heat? Honey, it's supposed to be dangerous out there today." "I'll be careful. Go early before it gets too bad." She finally turned to face me, and I saw something in her expression that looked almost like desperation. I need to get out of the house for a while. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I knew it was Friday, which meant it was Lila's turn to be Harper, while Harper did whatever she did with her mysterious boyfriend. I knew the farmer's market story was a lie, just like the library story and the grocery shopping story, and probably dozens of other small lies I'd never bothered to question. "Of course, sweetheart. I might run some errands myself later." Relief flooded her face. "That sounds perfect. We'll both get out and about, make the most of the day." After she left, I waited exactly 30 minutes before driving back to the labor district. The heat was already brutal at 9 in the morning, shimmering up from the pavement in waves that made everything look like a mirage. By the time I parked across from the yellow house, my car's air conditioning was struggling to keep up. I didn't have to wait long. The white Civic pulled up at 9:45, and I watched Harper and Lila execute their switch with the efficiency of people who'd done this dozens of times before. They stood on the tiny porch for maybe 3 minutes, Harper gesturing animatedly while Lila nodded and took what looked like a small purse and a set of keys. Then Harper got into a different car, a black BMW that had been parked around the corner, and drove away with a man I'd never seen before. Even at a distance, everything about him screamed money. The expensive haircut, the perfectly pressed clothes, the way he held himself like someone accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. Lila stood on the porch for a moment after they left, her shoulders slumped with what looked like exhaustion or resignation. Then she got into the white Civic and drove toward our neighborhood, presumably to spend the day being Harper, while Harper did God knows what with her rich boyfriend. I sat in my car, air conditioning running, trying to decide what to do next. I could follow the BMW, could try to find out who this man was and what kind of relationship he had with my daughter-in-law. Or I could go home and confront Lila directly, could force the issue before Harper had a chance to coach her on what to say. But as I watched the heat waves dance across the empty street, I realized there was a third option. I could go inside that little yellow house and see what Harper and Lila's life looked like when they weren't performing for anyone else. The front door was unlocked, not unusual in a neighborhood where most people couldn't afford anything worth stealing. I knocked anyway, calling out hello as I stepped inside. The elderly Hispanic man who emerged from the back bedroom moved slowly, leaning heavily on a walker. He was wearing pajamas at 10 in the morning, and his skin had the gray pallor of someone whose body was failing him. "See? Necesita algo?" His voice was weak but kind. "I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish very well. I'm looking for Lila." His face brightened. "Ah, Lila. She is working. Always working, that girl." His English was accented but clear. "I am Miguel, her papa. Please sit." I followed him to a small living room, noting how carefully he moved, how each step seemed to cost him effort. On the coffee table, I saw a small mountain of pill bottles, insulin, heart medication, blood pressure pills, and others I didn't recognize. "You a friend of Lila's?" he asked as he settled carefully into his chair. "Yes, sort of. I'm trying to help her with something. She is a good girl. Works so hard to take care of Rosa and me." He gestured toward the bedroom. "My Rosa, she is sleeping. The heart, it is very tired now." "How long have you been sick?" 2 years for me, 5 years for Rosa. The insurance, it does not cover everything. Lila, she works 2 jobs, but... He shrugged, the gesture of someone who'd made peace with impossible mathematics. I looked around the small, clean house, at the photographs covering every surface, at the evidence of a life lived with love, but not much money. These were the people Harper was using to justify her deception, this elderly couple who'd given Lila family when no one else would. "Miguel, what do you know about Lila's sister?" His face changed, became guarded. "Sister? The woman who looks just like Lila. Harper." He was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folding and refolding in his lap. "Lila, she tells us not to talk about this. She says it is complicated. It is complicated. But Miguel, I think Lila is in trouble and I want to help her. But I need to understand what's been happening." Another long silence. Then, the woman, she comes here sometimes, brings money for medicines. She looks exactly like our Lila, but... He tapped his chest. "The heart is different, colder. What does she ask Lila to do?" "To pretend. To be someone else for a few hours, a few days. Lila, she does not want to, but the medicine..." He gestured at the pill bottles. "Without the medicine, Rosa and I, we will die. What choice does she have? There are always choices, Miguel. They're not always good choices, but they exist." He looked at me with eyes that held the wisdom of someone who'd lived through poverty and illness, and all the compromises that survival sometimes requires. "You have money?" he asked bluntly. "Some." "You have insurance that covers everything? Family that can help when the bills come?" I thought about my comfortable house, my late husband's pension, the savings account that let me sleep at night without worrying about next month's expenses. "Yes." "Then you do not understand the choices we have." But he said it gently, without anger. "Lila, she is killing herself to keep us alive, working all day, then pretending to be someone else, then working again. She cries at night when she thinks we cannot hear." A sound from the bedroom made him look up. A thin voice called out in Spanish, and Miguel struggled to his feet. "Rosa's awake. She will want to meet you. She loves when Lila has visitors." Rosa Navarro was tiny and frail, propped up in bed with pillows that seemed to dwarf her, but her eyes were bright and sharp, and when she smiled at me, I could see where Lila had learned to find joy in difficult circumstances. "You are Lila's friend?" she asked in careful English. "Yes, I'm trying to help her. She is a good daughter, not our blood, but our heart." Rosa reached for my hand with fingers that felt like bird bones. "We know what she does for us. We know it hurts her soul, but without her..." "I understand. But Rosa, what if there was another way? What if we could help with the medical bills without Lila having to pretend to be someone else?" Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly followed by suspicion. "Why would you help us? We are nobody to you." "Because Lila is somebody to me. Because what's happening to your family affects my family. Because sometimes helping strangers is just the right thing to do." Rosa studied my face for a long moment. "The other woman, the one who looks like Lila, she is not a good person. She uses Lila's love for us to make Lila do bad things. Lila knows this, but..." She shrugged, the same gesture Miguel had made. What if that ended? What if we found a way for you to get the medicine you need without Lila having to lie for anyone? How? I didn't have an answer yet, but sitting in that small bedroom, holding Rose's fragile hand while Miguel dozed in his chair by the window, I realized that any solution had to start with protecting these two elderly people who'd done nothing wrong except love a baby nobody else wanted. I don't know yet, but I'm going to figure it out. I stayed for another hour, listening to stories about Lila's childhood, about the little girl who'd grown up determined to take care of the people who'd saved her. They showed me pictures. Lila's first day of school, her nursing A graduation, the small celebrations they'd managed despite their circumstances. By the time I left, the temperature outside had climbed past 95 degrees, and the heat hit me like a physical blow. But as I drove home through the shimmering Austin streets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days: clarity. Harper was using her twins' desperation to fund an affair. Lila was trapped between betraying her adoptive parents and participating in increasingly elaborate deceptions. Daniel and Mason were living with someone who was lying to them every single day, and I was the only one who could stop it. But stopping it meant finding a way to help Miguel and Rosa without destroying my own family in the process. It meant confronting Harper without driving her to more desperate measures. And it meant telling Daniel the truth in a way that wouldn't shatter his ability to trust anyone ever again. When I pulled into my driveway, the white Civic was already there. Through the kitchen window, I could see Lila moving around, wearing Harper's clothes and Harper's lifelike in costume that didn't quite fit. Time was running out. Harper would be back soon, and tomorrow I'd have to decide whether to keep my promise to tell Daniel the truth or find another way forward. As I sat in my air-conditioned car, gathering courage for whatever came next, I thought about Rosa's words. She is not a good person. Maybe not, but Harper was still Daniel's wife and Mason's mother and the woman I'd welcomed into my family 8 years ago. Whatever she'd become, whatever she'd done, she was still ours. The question was whether we could save her from herself before she destroyed all of us. Saturday evening brought no respite from the heat, but it carried something else, a heaviness in the air that had nothing to do with weather. I spent the afternoon preparing what I knew would be the most important meal of my life, my hands moving through familiar motions while my mind raced through all the ways this could go wrong. Harper had returned from her mysterious Friday afternoon looking radiant, almost glowing with happiness. She'd swept into a house full of energy, kissing Daniel with unusual passion and scooping Mason into a hug that lifted him off his feet. Whatever she'd been doing with her rich boyfriend, it had left her euphoric. But I'd also noticed how quickly that euphoria faded when she thought no one was looking. How she'd stare at herself in the hallway mirror with an expression I couldn't quite read. How she'd held Mason just a little too tightly during their bedtime story, as if she was memorizing the feel of him in her arms. Big family dinner tonight. I announced over breakfast. I invited Noah to join us when he gets back from his Paris route. Harper's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. Noah's coming? Tonight. Should be here around 6. I thought it would be nice to have everyone together. I watched her face carefully. You don't mind, do you? Of course not. I wasn't expecting company. I'll need to tidy up a bit. Daniel looked up from his newspaper. Since when do you tidy up for Noah? He's family. I know, it's just... Harper forced a smile. You know how I am. I like things to be perfect when we have guests. But Noah wasn't a guest. Noah was a pilot who'd called from Austin Bergstrom Airport 3 days ago, confused and worried because he'd seen Harper board his flight to Paris, while Harper was supposedly at home taking a shower. Noah was a thread that, when pulled, would unravel everything. I'd spent the morning making Harper's favorite foods, the pot roast she'd learned to love from my own mother's recipe, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans cooked with bacon the way my husband had preferred them. Comfort food for an uncomfortable conversation. I'd also made one additional preparation. Hidden in my kitchen junk drawer was a manila envelope containing everything I discovered over the past 3 days. Photographs I'd taken of Lila's house, notes about the inconsistencies in Harper's behavior. Even a copy of Noah's flight manifest that showed Harper Vega Carter as a passenger on Tuesday's Paris flight. But more importantly, I'd made a phone call. At 4 o'clock, there was a knock at the back door. When I opened it, Lila stood on my porch, wearing a simple dress I'd never seen before and looking terrified. "Mrs. Carter? You said to come at 4?" "Yes, honey. Come in." I glanced around to make sure Harper wasn't within earshot. "She's upstairs getting ready. We don't have much time." I led Lila to my husband's old study, a small room off the kitchen that we barely use anymore. She perched on the edge of the old leather chair, looking like she might bolt at any second. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "Last night I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about that little boy, about what this is doing to him. Mason, he knows something's wrong. Kids always know. Yesterday when I was pretending to be Harper, he kept staring at me. And when I tried to help him with his homework, I didn't know his teacher's name. I had to pretend I'd forgotten." Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "He's just a baby, and I'm lying his face every day." I handed her a tissue from the box on my husband's old desk. "Lila, I want you to know that whatever happens tonight, I'm going to help your parents. That's a promise." Her head snapped up. "What do you mean, whatever happens tonight?" "I've invited Noah to dinner. And Daniel doesn't know yet, but you're going to be joining us too." The blood drained from her face. "Mrs. Carter, no, you can't. Harper will. Harper will have to finally tell the truth." I sat down across from her, leaning forward so she could see I was serious. "Lila, this is the end. Tonight. And it has to end with you being free to live your own life instead of someone else's. But my parents will be taken care of. I've already spoken to my doctor about finding specialists who work on sliding fee scales. There are programs, resources that don't require you to commit identity fraud." She stared at me for a long moment. "You really mean that? You'd help us even after everything?" "Especially after everything. You've been as much a victim in this as Daniel and Mason." Footsteps on the stairs made us both freeze. Harper's voice called out, "Mom, is someone here?" I thought I heard voices. "Just the television, honey." I called back. To Lila, I whispered, "Stay here. Don't come out until I call for you. And Lila, when this is over, you're going to walk out of here as yourself, not as someone else's shadow." I found Harper in the kitchen, beautiful in a blue dress that brought out her eyes, putting the finishing touches on a centerpiece of wildflowers she must have picked from my garden. "The table looks lovely," I said. I wanted everything to be perfect. It's been so long since we had Noah over for dinner. She was smiling, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at the clock. "What time did you say he'd be here?" 6:30. "Daniel should be home any minute. And Mason's bus will be here soon." As if summoned by my words, Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I watched my eldest son gather his work gear, moving with the careful fatigue of someone who'd spent another scorching day working construction in 100-degree heat. He looked older than his 38 years, worn down by responsibility and honest work, and the kind of love that makes a man get up every morning to provide for his family. In 10 minutes, I was going to destroy his world, but I was also going to save it. Daniel came through the back door like he had thousands of times before, dropping his lunchbox on the counter and kissing first Harper, then me. "Something smells amazing. What's the occasion?" "Just felt like making a nice dinner for my boys," I said, hating how easy the lies came now that I'd had practice. "Noah's joining us." "Great. I haven't seen him since." He paused, thinking. "Actually, when was the last time Noah came for dinner?" Harper's hand still on the salad she was tossing. "I don't remember. It's been a while." "Too long," Daniel agreed, settling at the kitchen table with beer. He looked at Harper with the kind of casual affection that comes from years of shared life. "You look beautiful tonight. That dress is perfect on you." She blushed, actually blushed, and for a moment she was just a woman being complimented by the man she loved. "Thank you. I wanted to look nice for family dinner." Mason's bus arrived right on schedule, and he exploded to the front door with his usual energy, full of stories about the last day of day camp and excited about Noah's visit. "Is Uncle Noah bringing presents?" he asked, wrapping his arms around Harper's waist. "I don't know, sweetie. He just got back from a long trip, so he might be tired." "What trip?" Harper's eyes flickered to me for just a second. Just work stuff. You know how pilots travel. At exactly 6:30, Noah knocked on the front door. I answered it myself, giving him a hug that lasted a little longer than usual. Thanks for coming, honey. Thanks for inviting me. It smells incredible in here. He looked past me toward the kitchen, where Harper was visible through the doorway. Hey, Harper. Hi, Noah. Her voice was carefully neutral. How was your flight? Interesting. Very interesting. He looked at me, and I saw the question in his eyes. I nodded slightly. We gathered around a dining room table. The same table where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where Daniel had proposed to Harper 8 years ago, where Mason had blown out the candles on his first birthday cake. The good china reflected the light from the chandelier my husband had installed when the boys were little, and everything looked exactly as it should for a family dinner, except for the empty chair. Mom, you set an extra place, Daniel observed as I brought out the pot roast. Did I? Silly me. Old habits. But I didn't remove the place setting. Instead, I served everyone generous portions, making sure glasses were filled and napkins were in laps, and all the small rituals of family dinner were observed. So, Noah, Harper said with forced casualness, tell us about your Paris route. How was the flight? Noah set down his fork and looked at her directly. Actually, Harper, I was hoping you could tell me about the Paris flight. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ceiling fan clicking overhead, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of children playing in someone else's yard. I'm sorry. Harper's voice was carefully controlled. Tuesday's flight. Paris. You were on it. Daniel looked confused. What are you talking about? Harper was here Tuesday. She spent the day with Mom. Noah reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper. This is the passenger manifest. Harper Vega Carter, C2A. I was the pilot. Harper, I saw you board the plane. Harper's face had gone white. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. No mistake. You dropped your passport at security. I picked it up, was going to return it, but then I saw you were already seated with a man I didn't recognize. Noah's voice was gentle but implacable. You ordered champagne and extra peanuts. You were holding his hand. Noah, stop. Daniel's voice was tight with warning. I don't know what you think you saw, but Harper was here. Mom, tell him. All eyes turned to me. Harper's face was pleading, terrified. Daniel looked confused and angry. Mason was watching the adults with the wide-eyed attention of a child who senses something important is happening but doesn't understand what. And Noah waited, giving me the chance to either support the lie or tell the truth that would change everything. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting the movement. I needed to get something from the kitchen. I walked through the doorway, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. In my husband's study, Lila sat exactly where I'd left her, looking like she might be sick. It's time, I said softly. She shook her head. I can't. Mrs. Carter, please. I can't do this to them. You're not doing this to them. Honey, you're freeing them from something that was already destroying them. I held out my hand. Come on, let's finish this together. She took my hand with fingers that trembled, and together we walked back toward the dining room. I could hear Daniel's voice, tight with anger. I don't care what you think you saw, Noah. My wife was here with my mother and my son. She wasn't on any plane to Paris. Then explain this. Noah was saying, explain how I saw her with my own eyes. We stopped in the doorway. Mason saw us first, his mouth dropping open in perfect shock. Grandma, why are there two moms? The silence that followed was the sound of a world ending. Daniel's head whipped around, his eyes moving from Harper at the table to Lila beside me and back again, as if his brain couldn't process what he was seeing. What the hell? He started to stand, his chair scraping against the floor. Daniel, sit down. My voice was sharper than I'd intended, sharp enough to cut through his shock. Please, let me explain. He sat, but his face was white with confusion and growing anger. Mason continued to stare, his 7-year-old mind trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Harper looked at Lila with an expression of pure fury. What have you done? What I should have done weeks ago, Lila said quietly. She stepped forward into the dining room, and the family resemblance was staggering. They were identical in every physical way, but standing side by side, the differences in their lives were written in their posture, their clothes, the way they held themselves in the world. "Harper," I said, sitting back down and folding my hands on the table like this was a normal family dinner, "I think it's time you introduced everyone to your sister." "Sister?" Daniel's voice cracked. "What sister?" "Harper, what the hell is going on?" Harper looked around the table, at her husband's shocked face, at Mason's confusion, at Noah's grim understanding, at me with what might have been hatred or desperation or both. And then, finally, the perfect facade cracked completely. "Her name is Lila," Harper said, her voice hollow. "She's my twin sister. And yes, she's been pretending to be me while I was in Paris with Beau." The words hung in the air like smoke, poisoning everything they touched. Daniel made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. Mason looked from one woman to the other, tears starting to roll down his cheeks. "Daddy? I don't understand. Which one is my mom?" And in that moment, in the sound of my grandson's frightened voice, I realized that no matter how this ended, some things could never be repaired. Some truths were too big to be contained, too sharp not to cut everyone they touched. But as I looked around that table, at Daniel's shattered expression, at Harper's desperate defiance, at Lila's relieved exhaustion, at Mason's innocent confusion, I also knew that the truth, however painful, was the only foundation on which any of us could build a future worth having. The ceiling fan continued its clicking rhythm overhead, marking time in a world that would never be the same again. The silence that followed Harper's confession stretched like a held breath. Daniel stared at his wife who was sitting next to an identical stranger, with the look of a man watching his entire life rearrange itself into something unrecognizable. "Paris," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were in Paris, while your sister, while she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Daniel, let me explain." "Explain." The word exploded out of him as he shot to his feet, his chair toppling backward with a crash that made Mason flinch. "Explain how you've been lying to me for God knows how long. Explain how you let a stranger take care of our son while you were off doing. What exactly were you doing in Paris, Harper?" Harper's composure finally cracked completely. Tears started streaming down her face, but when she reached for Daniel's hand, he jerked away like her touch burned. "I was trying to find a way out," she sobbed. "Beau has connections, opportunities. He could give us a better life." "Us?" Daniel's laugh was bitter. "There is no us in this, Harper. There's you, living some fantasy life with another man, and there's me at home being an idiot who trusted his wife." Mason had gone very quiet, the way children do when the adult world becomes too frightening to process. He was staring at Lila with wide, confused eyes. "Are you really not my mom?" he whispered. Lila knelt beside his chair, her face wet with tears. "No, sweetie, I'm not your mom, but I care about you so much. These past weeks, spending time with you, it's been—" She looked up at Harper with something like accusation. "You have the most wonderful little boy, and you've been throwing it away for what? Money? Excitement? You don't understand," Harper said desperately. "You don't know what it's like to feel trapped, to feel like you're disappearing into someone else's life." "No," Daniel interrupted, his voice deadly quiet now. "You don't get to play the victim here. You don't get to make this about feeling trapped when you've been using your sister's desperation to fund your affair." He looked at Lila with something like pity. "That's what this was about, wasn't it? She found out you needed money for your parents." Lila nodded miserably. "My father has diabetes. My mother has heart problems. The medications cost more than I make in a month, and Harper offered to help if I would just fill in for her sometimes. I never meant for it to go so far." Noah, who had been silent through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. "How far did it go? How many times has this happened?" The question hung in the air while Harper and Lila exchanged a look that held months of shared deception. 6 times, Lila said quietly. 6 times over the past 4 months. Never for more than a day or 2. 6 times, Daniel repeated. 6 times my wife was off with another man while a stranger was in my house, taking care of my son, sleeping in my bed. His voice broke. God, how many times did I kiss you thinking you were Harper? Lila's face crumpled. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt anyone. My parents were going to die without those medications. So you decided to let my marriage die instead? That's enough, I said sharply, standing up before this could spiral further into cruelty. Daniel, sit down. Everyone sit down. We're going to figure this out like adults, not like children throwing blame around. Figured out? Daniel laughed bitterly, but he righted his chair and sat down. What's to figure out, Mom? My wife has been cheating on me with her identical twins' help. It's pretty straightforward. What's to figure out, I said firmly, is what happens next. Because whatever else has happened, we're still a family. We still have Mason to think about. And we still have 2 women here who both need our help, just in different ways. Harper looked up at me with something like hope. Mom, you understand, I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Stop, I cut her off. Harper, what you've done is inexcusable. You've lied to your husband, manipulated your sister, and worst of all, you confused and frightened your son. But Lila is right about one thing. You do have the most wonderful little boy and the most devoted husband, and somehow you convince yourself that wasn't enough. I turned to address the whole table. Now, here's what's going to happen. Harper, you're going to end whatever relationship you have with this bold person tonight, and you're going to figure out if you want to fight for your marriage or if you want to walk away from it. But you're not going to do both. And if I choose to fight for it? Harper asked quietly. Daniel made a sound of disgust. Right now, I can't imagine wanting to say anything about this marriage. Daniel, I said gently, I know you're angry. You have every right to be angry. But you also have a 7-year-old son who's watching his world fall apart. Whatever you decide about Harper, it has to be what's best for Mason. As if summoned by his name, Mason spoke up in a small, frightened voice. Are you and Mom getting divorced? The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. He looked at his son, this beautiful, innocent child who had done nothing wrong, but was about to pay the price for his parents' failures, and I saw his anger transform into something deeper and more complicated. I don't know, buddy. I don't know anything right now. Mason turned to Harper with a devastating honesty that only children possess. Why did you lie to me, Mom? Why did you let the other lady pretend to be you? Harper broke down completely then, reaching for her son with desperate hands. Baby, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you so much, more than anything in the world. Then why did you leave? His voice was so small, so hurt, that I felt my own eyes fill with tears. Because sometimes grown-ups make terrible mistakes. And I made the worst mistake of all. Can you fix it? The question hung in the air while Harper looked around the table, at her husband's devastated face, at her son's hopeful confusion, at her sister's guilty relief, at me with my notebook full of evidence and my heart full of love for all of them. I don't know if I can fix it, sweetheart, but I want to try. Daniel stood up abruptly. I need some air. I can't process this right now. He looked at Lila with something softer than anger. Ma'am, I'm sorry you got caught up in this. And I'm sorry about your parents. But I can't have you in my house right now. I understand, Lila said quietly. I should go. No, I said firmly. Lila, you're staying for dinner. We're going to finish this conversation like civilized people, and then we're going to figure out how to help your parents without anyone having to lie or cheat or pretend to be someone else. Mom, Daniel started. Daniel Carter, you will sit down and finish your dinner. And then you will listen while Lila and I explain to you how we're going to make sure Miguel and Rosa Navarro get the medical care they need through legal, honest means. I looked around the table with the authority of someone who had raised 2 boys and buried one husband and was not about to watch her family destroy itself over pride and hurt feelings. And Harper, you're going to sit there and think about whether a relationship of a man who would ask you to lie to your child is worth losing the people who actually love you. The authority in my voice was enough to get Daniel back in his chair, though he wouldn't look at Harper or Lila. Mason, sensing that the adult crisis was being managed by someone he trusted, started eating again with the resilience of childhood. "Now," I said, serving myself a portion of pot roast that I had no appetite for, "let's talk about solutions instead of blame. Because blame won't help Mason, and it won't help Miguel and Rosa, and it sure won't help this family figure out how to move forward." Noah, who had been watching this entire scene with the careful attention of someone trying to understand how his own family had become unrecognizable, finally spoke up. "Harper, I have one question. The man you were with on the plane, does he know about Lila? Does he know you have a twin?" Harper's face went white. "Why?" "Because if he knows, then this wasn't just about you having an affair. This was about him getting off on the deception, on knowing he could make you betray your family." Noah's voice was quiet but cutting. "And if he doesn't know, then you've been lying to him too, which means you don't even trust the person you're destroying your marriage for." The silence that followed was answer enough. Outside, the Texas heat pressed against the windows like a living thing. But inside our dining room, something had shifted. The truth was out, all of it, ugly and complicated and painful. But it was also, finally, complete. And in the completeness of truth, even truth this devastating, there was a possibility, not certainty, but possibility, of finding a way forward that didn't destroy everyone it touched. The ceiling fan clicked overhead, marking time in a world that was broken but not beyond repair, damaged but not beyond love. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee on a Saturday morning that felt both familiar and entirely different from the one that had changed everything. The heat had finally broken with the arrival of October, and through my window I could see the first hints of autumn color in the trees. Not the dramatic reds and golds of New England, but the subtle shift from green to gold that marked fall in Texas. The house was quiet. Daniel had moved out 6 weeks ago, taking an apartment across town that was close enough for Mason to walk to school from either place. The divorce papers had been filed, but they sat and signed on Harper's dresser, not out of hope, but because Daniel wanted to be sure he was making decisions from a place of clarity rather than anger. Harper was in counseling, individual therapy twice a week, and family therapy with Mason on Saturdays. She'd ended things with both a night of our dinner table confrontation, though I suspected that it had been easier than anyone expected. A man who would encourage a woman to deceive her child wasn't the kind of man who stuck around when the deception became inconvenient. She'd also started working full-time, taking a position at an elementary school across town, where she could use her teaching degree to rebuild something like independence. The paycheck wasn't much, but was hers, earned honestly, without requiring anyone else to live a lie. And Lila, "Good morning, Mrs. Carter." I turned to find her in the doorway, wearing scrubs and looking tired but peaceful in a way she hadn't the day I'd first knocked on her door. She'd moved in with us 2 weeks after the dinner that changed everything, ostensibly to help with Mason while Daniel figured out his living situation, but really because I couldn't stand the thought of her going back to that tiny house where desperation had driven her to decisions no one should have to make. "Good morning, honey. How are Rose and Miguel?" Papa's blood sugar was perfect yesterday, and Mama walked to the mailbox by herself. She poured herself coffee with the easy movements of someone who'd found her place in our kitchen. "The new insurance plan is working out better than we hoped." The insurance plan was something Daniel had arranged through his construction company. It had taken some creative paperwork and a few favors, but Miguel and Rosa Navarro were now covered as dependents of a full-time employee, namely Lila, who had been hired as the company's part-time safety coordinator while continuing her work as a nurse's aide. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was an honest one. "And you? How are you adjusting to living with us?" She smiled, the first completely unguarded smile I'd ever seen on her face. It's strange having so much space, having people to talk to who aren't worried about paying for their next meal. She paused, looking out the window toward where Mason was shooting baskets in the driveway. "That little boy is amazing, you know, the way he's handling everything. He's stronger than any of us realized." Mason had surprised everyone with his resilience. After the initial shock and confusion, he'd adapted to his new reality with the flexibility of childhood. He had 2 homes now, and in both of them, he was loved completely. And he had Lila, who wasn't his mother but had become something else entirely. a friend, a confidant, someone who understood what it felt like to be caught between two worlds. He gets that from his father, I said, watching Daniel's truck pull into the driveway for his Saturday morning visit. Daniel had been the one who surprised me most. After the initial fury faded, he'd thrown himself into problem solving with the same methodical approach he brought to construction projects. He'd researched therapists, insurance options, legal aid for families dealing with medical debt. He'd helped Lila find her job, had co-signed the lease on Miguel and Rose's new apartment, one with better air conditioning and handicapped accessibility. He'd also been seeing his own counselor, trying to understand how he'd missed the signs of his wife's unhappiness, how he could rebuild trust with his son, whether forgiveness was something he owed his family or something he needed to find for himself. Morning, Mom. Morning, Lila. He kissed my cheek and nodded politely to Lila, not warm, but not cold either. They were still figuring out how to exist in the same space. Two people who'd been intimate without consent, who'd share the most private moment of family life under false pretenses. Harper's upstairs getting ready, I said. They have family therapy at 10. I know. He poured himself coffee, his movements careful and controlled. How was she this week? It was a question he asked every Saturday, and I knew he was really asking whether Harper was really trying, to become someone worth forgiving, or whether she was just going through the motions until she could figure out her next move. She cried when Mason's tooth came out on Wednesday, not because he was hurt, but because she realized how many small moments she'd missed while she was elsewhere. Daniel nodded, filing this information away with all the other small signs of change he was tracking. And Mason asked me yesterday if people could love more than one mom. I looked out the window where my grandson was practicing the free throws Daniel had been teaching him. I told him, yes, that love doesn't have limits, but that trust has to be earned. What did he say to that? He said he understood, and then he asked if Lila could come to his school's fall festival next week. I watched Daniel process this, saw him weighing his son's emotional needs against his own hurt and confusion. It was a calculation he'd been making constantly since the night everything came apart. How to protect Mason while still honoring his own need to heal. Did you tell him yes? I told him it was up to you and Harper to decide. Before Daniel could respond, footsteps on the stairs announced Harper's arrival. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a simple dress and cardigan, her hair pulled back in a style that was more mature than the way she'd worn it during her affair. She looked older, more serious, but also cleaner somehow, like someone who'd stopped carrying secrets that were too heavy for her shoulders. "Good morning," she said quietly, her eyes taking the three of us, standing in the kitchen that had once been hers. "Morning," Daniel replied, his voice carefully neutral. "You ready to go?" "Almost. I just wanted to ask." She looked at Lila, then back at Daniel. "Mason mentioned the fall festival. I know it's my weekend, but if you think Lila should come instead—" "It's not instead," Daniel said firmly. "Mason doesn't have to choose between the people who care about him. But if Lila comes, she comes as herself, not as someone pretending to be someone else." "I'd like that," Lila said softly, "if everyone's comfortable with it." Harper nodded, and I saw something pass between the two sisters. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of understanding. They were both trying to figure out how to live with the consequences of choices that had seemed impossible at the time. "Mason," Harper called toward the back door. "Ready to go, sweetheart." He came running in, grass-stained and happy, and threw his arms around Harper with the uncomplicated love of a 7-year-old who decided to trust his mother again. "Mom, did Dad tell you about the basketball goal? I made 3 free throws in a row." "That's amazing, baby. I'm so proud of you." As they gathered Mason's things and headed for the door, I noticed the way Harper looked around the kitchen, not with ownership, but with something like gratitude. She'd lost her place here, had given up the right to call this home, but she was learning to find grace in still being welcomed, still being included in the small moments that make up a child's life. After they left for therapy, Lila and I sat on the back porch with our coffee, watching the morning light filter through the trees. The silence between us was comfortable now, the silence of people who'd been through something difficult together and come out the other side. "Do you think they'll work it out?" she asked. "I don't know," Daniel's not sure he can trust her again, and Harper's not sure she deserves another chance. But they're both sure they want to do right by Mason, and sometimes that's enough to start with. And us? Are we working out? I looked at this woman who'd been forced to live someone else's life, who'd found her way to our family through desperation, and stayed because she discovered she belonged here in ways that had nothing to do with resembling my daughter-in-law. Lila, honey, you're family now. Not because you look like Harper, but because you've earned your place here. Because you've shown up every day for the past 3 months. Helped with Mason, worried about all of us, made this house feel like home again. She was quiet for a long moment. I keep waiting for it to feel too good to be true. Good things aren't always too good to be true. Sometimes they're just good things that take a while to arrive. Later that afternoon, Daniel brought Mason home, and the three of them, Daniel, Harper, and Mason, sat on the front porch talking quietly while Lila helped me prepare dinner. Through the kitchen window, I could see them working through whatever they discussed in therapy, Mason bouncing between his parents with the easy acceptance of a child who'd been assured that divorce didn't mean the end of love. At dinner, we all sat around the same table where the truth had exploded our family 3 months ago. The conversation was careful but genuine. Daniel asking about Lila's parents, Harper sharing a funny story from her new job, Mason chattering about school and basketball, and the book he was reading. It wasn't the same family we'd been before. It might never be the same family again. But it was still a family, changed and scarred but held together by the decision to choose love over convenience, truth over comfort, responsibility over blame. As I watched them eat the meal I prepared, Daniel helping Mason cut his meat, Harper passing the rolls to Lila, everyone talking and laughing, and being present in ways we've forgotten how to do during those months of lies, I thought about the notebook hidden in my dresser drawer. All those careful observations, all that evidence of small betrayals and quiet deceptions. I'd thrown away last week because the truth it contained was no longer the most important truth in our lives. The most important truth was this: that people could make terrible mistakes and still be worth loving. That families could be broken and still be families. That forgiveness wasn't about pretending nothing had happened, but about choosing to move forward together instead of staying trapped in the past. Outside, the first cool evening of autumn settled over Austin like a blessing. And inside, around a table that had seen too much pain and just enough grace, we ate dinner and planned for tomorrow and learned what it meant to be a family that had been tested and found a way to endure. The ceiling fan clicked overhead, marking time in a world that was different now, but not diminished. A world where truth had a price, but lies that cost us more than we could afford to pay. A world where love, somehow, was still possible. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in late November, when the Austin air had finally turned crisp and the light to my kitchen windows held that golden quality that makes Texas autumns worth waiting for. I was making breakfast for Mason, scrambled eggs and toast cut into triangles, the way he'd liked them since he was 3 years old, when the hospital called. Mrs. Carter? This is Jennifer from Austin Regional. We have Miguel Navarro here, and you're listed as his emergency contact. My heart clenched. What happened? He collapsed at work this morning. His blood sugar dropped dangerously low. He's stable now, but we need someone to come in and discuss his care. I looked at the clock, 7:45 a.m. Lila had already left for her shift at the hospital. Mason's bus wouldn't come for another hour, and Daniel wouldn't be by to pick him up until after school. I'll be right there. Can you call Lila Navarro? She works in your cardiac wing. She's his daughter. After I hung up, I found Mason in the living room, backpack ready, watching cartoons of the patient resignation of a child whose family had taught him that sometimes plans change without warning. Sweetheart, I need to go to the hospital. Miguel, you remember Lila's papa? He's sick. Mason's face scrunched with worry. Is he going to die? The question hit me like a physical blow. This child had already learned too much about the ways adults could disappoint and frighten the people they loved. He didn't need to learn about the ways bodies could fail them too. I don't think so, baby, but I need to go help Lila take care of him. Can you be extra good at school today? Should I pray for him? Yes, sweetheart. That would be very nice. I called Harper's school and left a message asking her to pick Mason up instead of sending him to after-school care. Then I drove through the morning traffic to the hospital, my mind racing through all the complications this could create. Miguel's collapse meant his diabetes was getting worse despite the better medical care. It meant more medications, more doctor visits, more of the endless calculations that came with trying to keep someone alive when their body was determined to give up. I found Lila in the cardiac ICU, still wearing her scrubs, holding her adoptive father's hand while he slept. She looked up when I walked in, her face streaked with tears. They said his blood sugar dropped to 40. If his co-worker hadn't found him when he did. She couldn't finish the sentence. I pulled a chair beside the hospital bed and took her other hand. Miguel looked smaller than I remembered, his weathered face pale against the white pillows. The monitors around him beeped steadily, tracking heartbeat and blood pressure and all the other numbers that had become the mathematics of his survival. What do the doctors say? That we caught it in time. But his body isn't processing insulin the way it should. They want to put him on a continuous glucose monitor, adjust his medications again. She wiped her eyes with her free hand. Mrs. Carter, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped us get the insurance. If we were still trying to pay for everything ourselves. You don't need to think about that now. We're here, he's getting care, and that's what matters. A soft knock on the door made us both look up. Harper stood in the doorway, still wearing professional clothes she'd put on for her teaching job, looking uncertain about whether she was welcome. I got your message, she said quietly. I picked Mason up from school. He's with Daniel at the construction office. They're building a birdhouse together. She stepped into the room, her eyes taking in Miguel's frail form. How is he? Stable, Lila said. Thank you for getting Mason. I know you didn't have to. Yes, I did. Harper moved to the foot of the bed, looking at this man whose medical bills had been a catalyst for so much deception and pain. Mr. Navarro, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry I used your illness to justify my lies. I'm sorry I put Lila in an impossible position. Miguel's eyes fluttered open at the sound of voices. When he saw Harper, his face showed a moment of confusion. The same confusion everyone experienced when seeing the twins together. Lila, his voice was weak but alert. I'm here, Papa. Lila squeezed his hand. And this is Harper, my sister. She came to check on you. Miguel studied Harper's face with the careful attention of someone who'd spent months wondering about the cold woman who looked like his beloved daughter. You are the one who helped with the medicine money? Harper's face flushed. Yes, but not for the right reasons. I'm sorry, Mr. Navarro. I took advantage of your situation, and I hurt people because of it. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between Harper and Lila. You hurt my daughter, too. Yes, I did. But she forgives you. That is what family does. We forgive the people who hurt us, because love is stronger than hurt. He looked at Harper with eyes that held no anger, only the wisdom that comes from a lifetime of choosing grace over grudges. You're a family now, see? Both of you. My Lila's sisters. Harper broke down then, tears streaming down her face as she moved to take Miguel's other hand. I don't deserve forgiveness. Not from any of you. Forgiveness is not about deserving, he said gently. It is about deciding that love matters more than being right. Over the next hour, as Miguel drifted in and out of sleep and the monitors tracked his steady improvement, the three of us sat in that small hospital room and had the conversation we should have had months ago. Harper talked about feeling trapped in a life that seemed too small for her dreams, about meeting Beau and being seduced by the idea of a bigger, more glamorous existence. Lila talked about the desperation of watching her parents suffer, about the impossible choice between letting them die and betraying people she'd come to care about. And I talked about the notebook I'd kept, about the small signs that had told me something was wrong, about the decision to confront the truth instead of pretending it didn't exist. I keep thinking about Mason, Harper said as afternoon light slanted through the hospital window. About what this taught him. That the people who are supposed to love him unconditionally will lie to his face if it serves their purposes. That's not what he learned, I said firmly. What Mason learned is that families can survive terrible mistakes if everyone is willing to do the work of healing. He learned that truth is hard but necessary. And he learned that love doesn't mean never hurting each other. It means choosing to stay and figure out how to do better. Do you really believe that? Before I could answer, Daniel appeared in the doorway with Mason at his side. My grandson was carrying a small wooden birdhouse, painted bright blue and decorated with his careful 7-year-old handwriting. For Lila's papa. We finished our project, Daniel said, his eyes taking in the scene, Harper and Lila on either side of Miguel's bed, both of them holding his hands, both of them looking like they'd been crying and talking and maybe, finally, healing. Is this for me? Miguel asked, his face brightening as Mason approached the bed. I made it with my dad. We thought you might want to hang it in your new apartment, so birds can visit you. That is the most beautiful birdhouse I have ever seen. Thank you, Mijo. Mason beamed, then looked seriously at Miguel. My mom taught me that when people are sick, we take care of them, even when it's hard. Harper's breath caught. When did I teach you that? When Grandma had the flu last month, and you brought her soup every day, even though you were tired from work. Mason looked at her with the clear honesty that children bring to complicated situations. You said family means showing up when people need you, even if it's inconvenient. And you've been showing up, Daniel said quietly, speaking to Harper directly for the first time in weeks. For Mason, for therapy, for all the hard work of trying to make things right. Harper looked at her husband, her ex-husband, technically, though the divorce papers still sat unsigned, with something like hope. Does that matter? The showing up? It's the only thing that matters, he said. Not the mistakes we made, but what we do after we make them. That evening, we all gathered around Miguel and Rosa's new dining table, a small oak piece that Daniel had built and delivered the week before. Rosa had insisted on cooking despite our protests, and the small apartment filled with the smells of her famous enchiladas and Spanish rice. It was crowded with all of us there, Daniel, Harper, Mason, Lila, me, and Miguel still weak, but determined to be part of the celebration of his recovery. We had to pull in chairs from the bedroom and use TV trays for some plates, but somehow it worked. I have an announcement, Harper said as we finished eating. She looked nervous but determined, the way someone looks when they're about to jump off a high dive. I've been accepted to graduate school, the education program at UT. I start in January. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence of people absorbing good news, figuring out what it meant for all of them. That's wonderful, I said finally. What will you study? Special education. Working with children who need extra support. She looked around the table. I realize I want to help kids who feel like they don't fit anywhere, like they're too complicated for the regular world. Like Mason felt when everything was falling apart, Daniel said, understanding immediately. Exactly like that. Harper looked at her son with eyes full of love and regret. I can't undo the mistakes I made, but maybe I can use what I learned to help other families avoid making the same ones. Will you still live in Austin? Mason asked, and I could hear the worry underneath the question. Yes, baby. I'll always live near you. That's never going to change. Later, after we cleaned up dinner and Miguel had been helped back to bed, and everyone else had gone home, Lila and I sat on Rosa's small balcony drinking coffee and watching the lights come on across Austin. It feels different now, she said, like we're all finally telling the truth about who we really are. Even the painful truths? Especially the painful truths. She was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Carter, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about moving out of your house. My heart sank. Have I done something wrong? No, nothing like that. You've been more generous to me than I ever had a right to expect. But I think I need to figure out who I am when I'm not living in someone else's space. When I'm not Harper's sister or your temporary daughter-in-law or the woman who used to lie for a living. I understood. Over the past 4 months, Lila had been many things to many people, but she'd never had the chance to simply be herself. Where would you go? There's a small house for rent near here, close enough to help with Mama and Papa, far enough to have my own life. She smiled. Daniel offered to help me fix it up, not because he owes me anything, but because he said every person deserves a space that belongs to them. That sounds like Daniel. Mrs. Carter, can I ask you something? Do you think they'll get back together? Daniel and Harper? I thought about the way Daniel had looked at Harper in the hospital that afternoon, about the unsigned divorce papers on her dresser, about the careful way they've been rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. I don't know, but I think they're both becoming people who might be worth getting back together with. And sometimes that's how love works. Not because you never hurt each other, but because you do the work to become worth loving again. The Austin skyline stretched out before us. All those lights representing all those families, all those people trying to figure out how to love each other better. Somewhere out there, Daniel was reading Mason a bedtime story in his small apartment. Somewhere else, Harper was probably studying for her graduate school entrance exams and wondering if redemption was something you could earn or just something you had to accept as a gift. And here, in this small apartment where an elderly couple slept peacefully knowing their medical bills wouldn't bankrupt them, where their adopted daughter had finally found her own voice, where forgiveness had turned out to be stronger than resentment, we were learning what it meant to be a family not by blood or by law, but by choice. The truth had cost us everything we thought we wanted, but it had given us back something better. The chance to love each other as we really were, not as we pretended to be. Outside, November in Texas whispered promises of December, of Christmas morning around a tree that would somehow accommodate all of us. The divorced couple learning to co-parent, the woman who'd lied and the woman who'd cover for her, the grandmother who'd refused to let secrets destroy her family, the little boy who'd forgiven everyone because love was the only lesson that really mattered. It wouldn't be the Christmas card perfect family we'd once thought we were, but it would be real and it would be ours, and sometimes that's the only happy ending worth having. This story reveals profound truths about family, deception, and redemption that resonate deeply in our modern world. The most powerful lesson is that truth, however painful, is always a foundation for authentic relationships. Eloise's decision to document small inconsistencies and confront reality reminds us that love sometimes requires uncomfortable conversations. We learn that desperation can lead good people to make terrible choices, like Lila's situation with her parents' medical bills. This reflects real struggles many families face today with healthcare costs and financial pressure. The story shows us that sustainable solutions come from community support and honest communication, not deception. Perhaps most importantly, the narrative demonstrates that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior. It means choosing love while maintaining healthy boundaries. Daniel's journey from betrayal to cautious reconciliation shows us that healing is possible, but it requires genuine accountability and consistent change over time. For our daily lives, this story encourages us to pay attention to small signs when something feels wrong, to seek help for our struggles before they drive us to desperate measures, and to remember that families are built not on perfection, but on the willingness to show up authentically, especially after we've made mistakes. The ultimate message: real love survives truth, but it cannot survive sustained deception. Thank you for watching the video. Please comment with number 1 to let me know you have watched the whole video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to always receive new videos as soon as possible.